Good afternoon. I'm Counselor Knutson, and I would like to call our weekly informational meeting to order, and thank you for being with us. First item on our agenda for today would be our City Council staff report.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. Just a couple of things to give you an update on. One, just half of a reminder, and just to let you know what we're doing internally. Every week we release a notice of public meetings. I think you'll see it up on the overhead. Concerning when City Council meetings are. We've also then begun to include your City Council committee meetings, and also if there are large public hearings such as 57th Street, we also would put those on. Anytime we think there might be a quorum of City Council members present discussing public business, we will do that. Just an item of note, when you do receive emails from a department concerning a neighborhood meeting, those actually will not be posted on your public meetings unless you so desire, so be careful of your quorum if you should ever potentially have a quorum at those types of meetings. In addition, just to let you know, we had all attended an election workshop last week with Secretary of State Chris Nelson. It's an annual workshop that we work as a staff to attend so we can become acquainted with and the changes in election laws and procedures. And then on that note, we're also working to update the election books, the city election books, because the ordinance takes effect on December 14th. And so we'll get you those when we have a final working copy in the midst of, it is now half kind of here and half with media services, and they're working on that for us. And then also to remind everyone, the next election is April 8th, and we have candidates who have announced their intent to run, and you can find those candidates and their financial information available on the siouxfalls.org website. In addition, just to let council members know, there will be a meeting for the performance measurement group next Wednesday from 1:30 to 4 to discuss the survey. And I think some of you have already been notified of that, but there'll be a meeting to discuss that survey, and then that committee will report to the council and the mayor, I think, on December 10th, the following December 10th, of some of their discussions concerning the survey. And then also you have a copy of your 2008, it's a draft of your legislative agenda. It has some color ink on there. The color in blue are comments from the council concerning agenda item, or number 3, which actually is the only item that has any discussion going at this point. And hopefully you guys can discuss that today, and then we can move forward and get that calendared for the December 17th meeting. And then finally, Councilor Cavanaugh had requested an update from the most recent Charter Revision Commission meeting, and I just gave you a really quick summary. It's the Board of Ethics, of course, as you know. They're asking to propose changes which would expand the Board of Ethics oversight of City Council matters concerning the prohibition section, that's 2.05A and B. Again, the City Clerk is seeking to propose changes to accommodate more absentee voters, and that basically is turning in the nominating petitions about 2 weeks ahead of time. This would mirror state law if it's adopted by the charter and then by the voters. Councilmember Staggers also is seeking to place a provision in the charter under Article 5, which would require an ordinance seeking to increase taxes, fees, or assessments to state that in the first sentence of the title of the ordinance, and his example to that is you can find online. That's the ordinance appropriation. That's done annually. And then finally, finance, there has been some changes to that. Proposed changes to Section 505 have been withdrawn, and for Section 504 or 5.04, they would actually only change the provision of law which states it would be a 3-year CIP plan to a 5-year CIP plan. Section 5.06 then deletes a section which would mirror state law, which is 921.2, and then it also seeks to change the term enterprise fund, if you will, to proprietary fund. Section 5.07 of that, and it's Article 5 under financial procedures, adds a phrase concerning supplemental appropriations. Current law requires an appropriation of revenues in excess of those estimated in the budget. The new language would also add a supplemental appropriation could be drawn from sufficient fund balance. Section 5.11 proposes that the mayor's budget would include these 3 items. They are new to the charter if they're adopted. One would be the mayor's budget would identify and include a 5-year goal for the city, commentary on how the plan addresses the sustainability of the city and the region of which it is a part. And the third one would be to include methods to measure outcomes and performance of the capital plan related to the long-term goals of the City of Sioux Falls. Not near from the end, Section 5.12 would change the adoption date of the CIP budget to coincide with the date of the operating budget program. This would both then occur by September 30th. That would be a change. Section 5.13 would, it's kind of more of a housekeeping issue, but currently the charter has copies of the budget and the capital program and such are available at suitable locations. This would actually just change it to suitable places. This would change it to suitable locations, and then it would also add suitable means, which would include the internet. So it would allow that to be available for the internet. And lastly, Human Resources would like to propose an amendment to allow the mayor to opt out of the benefit program of the city. Right now, the language says he shall participate. This would change it so he may participate, and an ordinance would accompany that. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Deborah. Councilor Costello?
Just as a footnote to that, Councilor Litz and I were at the last Charter Revision Committee meeting, and they strongly encouraged the rest of the council, and I know other councilors have been there from time to time as well, but I think they would very much appreciate some input from the rest of the council on these items, because I think they feel like they've been maybe just a little bit left out there without our input, and so just wanted to relay that, again, they would like us to come to their next meeting, which is,
This Thursday, December 6th, and then December 13th at 3:30, both of those meetings here at Carnegie, I believe. Councilor Cavanaugh?
I've been attempting to follow what's going on with the commission. One of the things that is of particular interest and concern to me is the proposed changes to Article 5. And in the last week, I've seen no less than 4 proposals, I believe. Do we now know what the final proposal is to the Charter Commission for changes to Article 5? Because if there is finally a final change proposal, I'd like to see it.
Councilor Costello, can you help me on this? I don't have an answer.
I don't believe they are done discussing that, and I think they're waiting for some of our input. They would like to know what our reaction is to some of that. And for the open discussion, I mean, that commission doesn't answer to us. I mean, they, I think, advise us of what they come up with, and then it goes to the vote. So I think they're looking for our input.
Would you have anything else, Councilor Cavanaugh? Okay, over here, any comments, questions for our city clerk? Okay, and again, the charter revision will meet this Thursday, December 6th, and again next Thursday, December 13th. Yes, and that was the time I had said, is 3:30 p.m. both days here at Carnegie. Okay, so thank you for your questions and comments. Okay, let's see. Don't see Mayor here right at this moment. I'm going to run through committees reports, please. Audit Committee, Councilor Cavanaugh.
No report.
Okay, and regarding the Audit Committee, I'd just like you all to know that Councilor Costello and the lead auditor committee member, Brad Witzel, did a show on Channel 16 last Friday, and that will start airing today on Inside Town Hall. And thank you, both of you, for your help on that show. Fiscal Committee, Councilor Costello.
We will be meeting immediately after this informational meeting to discuss some of the changes in the TIF 5 proposal. So we look forward to that from Mike Cooper and possibly Gene.
Okay, thank you. Land Use Committee, Councilor Jameson.
Just a reminder that at 3 p.m. on the 10th, we will meet concerning some changes in the home occupation ordinance.
Okay, Public Services Committee, I know Councilor Brown is out of town today, and our next Public Services Committee meeting, I believe, is next week, the 10th of December at 5 p.m. I believe that is correct. And regarding the Public Services Committee, I would just like to honor a request from our Vice Chair, Councilor Litz, as far as referring the child care topic over to Public Services for early next year. And again, the idea is just to to just just to review what we have on the books at the city level as far as child care regulations, and then we might want to review what the state licensing regulations are and so forth. And Councilor Litz and I met with a few people last week who are very knowledgeable in this area just to kind of start reviewing this topic. City Council open discussion. Anyone? A couple of quick things I will add on that is, would you please all plan to participate in the just the annual review and executive session of our city clerk on Monday, December 17th. I know we have a joint meeting that day, and I know December is very, very, very crowded, and we'll just run that as efficiently as we can, but we'll just follow the format we did last year. And again, I have asked all of you to just get your evaluation in to me by Friday at noon this week, if that's possible, and we will just, take care of this annual responsibility. So, Councilor Costello?
On another item, if you're ready.
Yeah, go
I'm just
ahead.
curious, a couple weeks ago, I think Councilor Staggers had a concern about a well field analysis, or about the well and we were told that we would get an analysis. I have not seen that yet to date. I know Mark's not here, but Kevin, do you know what the status of that?
Okay. Do you, Councilor Costello, would you just follow up with Director Cotter on that, please?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Any other open discussion items before we move on to? Yes,
Well,
Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I guess I might as well mention, I had some phone calls this weekend, with the heavy snowstorm, and most of the people said they were very happy with how the city was responding to cleaning the streets and so forth, but there were two people in particular who were having difficulty getting snow out of their driveways, and they did bring up the issue of snow gates. And so there are some people out there who are aware that there is a way that we could possibly take a look at that issue and deal with it. So I would encourage my colleagues to remember that the next time we deal with that issue.
Thank you, Councilor. And also, I would like to tell you that we're very interested, and everyone's very interested in just getting some more input, even right now, on the proposal for our legislative resolution. And, we've been just mentioning this for a few weeks, but would anyone have any comments they'd like to make today about the proposal as we have it? Because we've been trying really hard to firm up a consensus among ourselves. Councilor Benega?
My only question or concern, and I'd like to hear from some of the people who've had some input in this already, is the fact that on certain issues we ask for local control and others we don't. When we talk about tobacco or alcohol licenses and those kinds of things, I think we need to find... He wants to make some comments, obviously. He's excited.
That really surprises me.
Yeah, I'm surprised at that, too.
Councilor Costello, will you go ahead with...
I think if you were to go and to look at some other communities that have struggled with this, you could look to Minneapolis or even Fargo in the Moorhead area. And you can see when there's an inconsistent approach to this that it creates a lot of difficulties with various retailers. And that is where my concern is at. And I firmly believe that, if there's not a consistent approach to this matter, and I believe here in Sioux Falls we would go smoke-free if it came down to a local control issue. I don't know where the rest of the outlying communities are at in that position, but it's certainly, if we didn't as a region go that way, it would create a huge unfair, uncompetitive balance. And I think it would attract people to locate right outside of city limits. And plus, I firmly believe that it will motivate people to drive farther in their cars late at night when they're impaired.
Would there be any other comments among any of you on that? Contra Cavanaugh?
Well, I don't dispute the scenario that something like that might happen. I question how often it's going to happen. And secondly, we're, 10 miles from the Minnesota border, the Iowa border? It's very difficult for me to say that we should draw a line someplace. I think when it comes to matters of public policy, I will always advocate for that level of government that can best handle that to the best wishes of the citizens of this community. that they should have that authority. I think waiting for things to be done on a statewide level have frustrated many communities for many years, and this just happens to be a couple of them that we're talking about now.
And Contra Cavanaugh, I happen to agree with you totally on that topic. And again, I realize there's a little bit of a patchwork of regulation that way, but on the other hand, different communities, they set their own speed limits and so forth, and there's not a state regulation there. And again, the fact that the state of South Dakota has the alcohol, gambling, and tobacco businesses so well tied up there, unfortunately, in my opinion, that, if in fact we could make progress on making good decisions statewide, I would wait a little bit longer, but I'm getting a little impatient on that topic. Okay. Any other thoughts on our legislative agenda as we have it set in front of us? Okay, I'm going to assume that this is going to be our legislative agenda, and I believe we were, again, on the third factor. I mean, my, preference on the tobacco bit is a statewide ban, but I'm, so that we can get this, I think a split vote or among us right now, and so I'm going to change my vote to local option on that so that we can get this resolution handled. Again, in an ideal world, statewide ban of smoking in bars, restaurants, and casinos would, of course, be my first preference personally. But I'm only speaking for myself, of course. So I'm changing my vote to local option so we can get number 3 firmed up. Any other discussion among any of you? Yes, Councilor Costello.
Just a grammatical thing. I think on item 2, interest should be interested organizations.
Okay. Thank you. Would there be any other thoughts? May I give the City Clerk's office permission to consider this final now with what we have?
So, Dee, when are we going to?
Yes, Councilor Stagers.
When are we going to vote on this?
December 17th.
17th, okay.
And we are running out of time. Again, the legislature convenes January 8th, but we have our Breakfast Club meeting on Wednesday, December 19th, thank you, Councilor Jameson, at 7:30 a.m. at Leonardo's in the pavilion. And we'd like to, typically we have taken our proposal, our resolution that has been passed by us by then, to give it to our legislators to tell them that we have many concerns as they go to peer again, but that these are our priorities. Okay, we're going to move on, and thank you for your input, all of you, on that topic. And thank you, Deborah, for your work on trying to get us all on the same page, which is obviously very tricky always. And now for staff. Yes, Councilor Stagers, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just happened to think. On number 3, we're not going to take kind of a informal poll about what each of us think about that one.
Well, I believe that's what we've been doing because we've been bringing it up here at Informationals, and then Deborah had sent an email around to us, and she's been very patient just trying to get a consensus among us. And so would you like to have more discussion on number 3 right now? Informal poll, okay, we can do that right now.
I mean, could we have
and so
straw poll?
why don't you ask the questions that you want to ask, and so we can just quickly get on to our speaker for today.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think I know, some of the votes of the council members or feelings on this number 3, but I'm not quite sure. And I don't know.
You can go ahead and poll.
Can we have a straw poll? Yes.
Okay. So, all right. I believe this is the question. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Again, number 3, for those who do not have this paper in front of them, this draft, is number 3 right now is what we've had on last year, is the Sioux Falls City Council strongly encourages the legislature to permit municipalities to have local control to regulate the sale and use of tobacco products. That is the statement that was on our agenda, our legislative proposal last year. It doesn't mean it has to be exact for this year, but I'm going to ask for a show of hands right now. How many of you would support what's on the, what I just read to you? Again, it would be a local control option for tobacco products. We're only talking tobacco, nothing else. May I have a show of hands if you favor local option in your language on this? Okay, I believe that we have completed our informal poll, and thank you, because I feel like that just gives a little bit more finality to this for this year, and thank you for that suggestion. Okay, now we will move on to our, excuse me, Councilor Benega.
Well, as long as Kermit needs to know how we're going to vote on local control, I'd like to have an informal poll on snow gates.
Oh, sure.
Would you like that added to the legislative priorities?
Absolutely.
Hey, that's good. Well,
Since every year I still have the floor, Kermit. Since every year for the last 5 years we've voted on this, and we've voted it down 7-1, I'm assuming that straw poll would continue to be in effect. And since snow gates cost us $1.5 million more than the budget that we've approved, plus it also, based on the North Dakota experience, delays snow removal by 50%, I think it would be a great opportunity for a straw poll.
Well, I think if I can respond to
Okay, quickly,
Councilor
please.
Benega's remarks there, I've never heard the figure $1.5 million. Each year, what I propose is $6,000 to buy 2 snow gates to experiment, so that we can see how it works in Sioux Falls. I mean, Sioux Falls is a unique community. We're not like Bismarck or Fargo or other places. And so I think it would be good to experiment to see if we can come up with a system with snow gates that would allow the citizens of Sioux Falls to get up early in the morning and get ready and go to work and not have to worry about digging out from the ice and snow that's in their driveway.
Okay.
So it's pure experimentation.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Stagers. Is very quickly, even though I do realize that is not a legislative priority quite yet anyway, is that quickly would you show, we've discussed this topic really quite a few times in the 5.5 years I've been on City Council, but would you quickly provide me a show of hands if in fact you want to, if you support our city getting into using snow gates right now, particularly as it pertains to legislative agenda?
Sure.
Okay, 1 vote. Thank you. We finished that poll too. Now we
Two
better get on.
votes. Two
And
votes.
I'm going to tease you all.
There's 2 votes.
No, I just had a comment.
Okay,
Oh, a
Councilor
comment.
Costello.
I think you should work with the manufacturers, get them to donate use of one over one winter, so we could explore that. I'd like them to start with my street in particular, so.
I was going to,
If you would support this, we could try to make sure your street was worked on, so.
I was going to tease all of you that the other day when we did our shows on Channel 16 that we were encouraging the citizens of Sioux Falls to step forward and run for office, and I'm wondering if today they'll still want to. Anyway, but on a serious note, we will go forward with our staff report, and I would like to thank Councilor Jamison and Councilor Costello for attending the performance measurement meeting all morning over at the Orpheum Theater. I was there also, and Tamara and Deborah were with us too. And anyway, so we kicked off our performance management program, and we have a guest with us today. And first of all, I'm sorry, I need to ask for our monthly financial statement from Gene Rowenhorst, and then we will go into performance measurement. I got a little bit ahead of myself, which is not unusual for me.
Tom Huber with the Finance Office. I'm going to briefly cover the monthly financial report. Gene's been working on the ICMA performance measurement program all day today. And I'll be brief so we can get right to that presentation. The letter that was written this month was basically on the enterprise and internal service funds. It was somewhat in follow-up to the more detailed information that was provided to you by Public Works on those 4 enterprise funds that they operate. As we've discussed before, we always follow cash flow closely in the enterprise and internal service funds. It's demand for service that drives those funds more so than the budget. So the rate models really then come along and help us in setting our targets for this cash flow and do much like the budgets do in the governmental funds. They give us something to shoot for, how we're performing, where we're coming in at. And as you can read through in the letter, based upon the consultant reviews to this point of the year, everything is performing quite well. So I won't go to any more detail on that, and will, if there are no questions in between, would skip down to the debt outstanding and authorized on page 16 of your monthly report. Everything else in between is fairly well as it was last month, just updated for current expenditures and revenues. On the debt page on page 16, the first thing to probably cover is the Series 2007B, the quality of life bonds for the library and parks. It's authorized not issue amount of $35 million. The bonds were, they have not been closed yet, but were issued. Par amount of $25.57 million. True interest cost of 4.31% on that 20-year issue. In comparison, the long portion of the Lewis and Clark, the $65 million portion on that, the 30-year bond was 4.47 for a true interest cost. So just for some comparison on the interest that we received on those. Did leave us in the construction fund after you account for the issuance cost, the reserve for debt service, and the reserve for capitalized interest with about little over $22.6 million in the bond construction fund. Of that, to this point, in your CIP plan in 07 and 08, the main library, Drake Springs, and Harmon Park have basically you've committed to $20.25 million of that. The rest still remains in the contingency. The library does have some proposed amendments that may be coming through shortly, and that contingency fund that was set aside and was discussed earlier on before we issued the bonds is set aside based upon what the architect estimates might come in as we get closer to actually the projects being bid. So with that, I'd answer any questions on the monthly, otherwise I'll...
Councilor Stagers.
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned the contingency fund. Is that the same thing as a reserve fund?
No, that would
'Cause
be, that would
okay.
be inside of the bond construction fund. Those proceeds would be available for use. They're not reserved. The other portion, around $3 million, is reserved for specific purposes. There's debt service reserve that's set up, capitalized interest is set up, there's bond issuance that costs that come off the top to get you down to what goes into the actual construction account. But that amount would be available for construction.
And also, if you could let us know how much we're going to be paying when we pay off all the bonds and the principal, how much is that going to be?
Total principal and interest on this issue, you have a principal of $25,570,000 and interest of $13,681,465.
Okay. And if I could ask just one more question. My understanding...
And that's a 20-year term.
A 20-year term, okay. My understanding is that we're going to be paying a lot of the principal in later years instead of up, you know. Is there any particular reason?
I'm not sure that wasn't just the way the bond was structured when they were looking at the sale for the bond.
Okay.
I'll let you...
These bonds, or Gene Roanhorst, Director of Finance for the city, these bonds are structured much like a home mortgage, so by definition, what happens, you will be paying off more principal towards the end.
Would there be any other questions? Councilor Costello?
Tom or Gene, generally we like to hear a little bit about our sales tax and how we're doing compared to budget. We're getting closer to the end of the year. What's your thoughts on that?
In this monthly report, we were at 6.1%. That's jumped up to 7.1% in November. We've got November numbers in. Obviously, this report is a little later. But a big portion of that was due to some of the audits that the state had done. So still, December, we get 3 checks. The first check in January is posted back to December as well. So December is going to be the telling month.
And you say we're at 7.1.
7.1 right now.
For the first 11 or
For the
10
first-
and a half months?
Yeah,
Or-
11,
Okay.
11 months, the payments for those months.
Okay. And just
And
for the-
December is a pretty big month for us, so that's...
And our budget is at 7%?
Our budget is at 7 and 7, but last year, since we ended up at 8.3, we only need 6.2% to make this year's budget.
Okay.
But where it comes back is we need 7 this year and 7 next year to make next year's budget.
Councilor Cavanaugh?
Tom, for some reason, I'm recalling when we talked about the bonds, quality of life bonds, and it was shortly after the Drake Springs Pool election. The discussion was, well, we don't need $25 million now. It's going to be more in the neighborhood of 17 to 18. In fact, I believe Councilor Staggers asked several times. Why is it now the amount that you just told us?
I'm not sure all the numbers that would have been quoted out, but at the time, the 18 probably would have come from what was in the 2008 budget. There was also some amount in 2007, and some of this is on a reimbursement basis. When they issued the bonds, they're reimbursing us for some of the costs in 2007. So at the time that we did the CIP, it was actually, I believe, just shy of 20 million is what the total project added up to. And then there was a contingency, the construction contingency that was added on to that based upon what the estimates were going to be. So that's what I know. Do you have anything else to?
I was under the impression that the costs that we had, whether they were 07 expenditures like Harbidon, we wanted to make sure we got some stuff in there. I thought those were all inclusive, and that totaled up to somewhere around 18.
I think Tom was right about the 18 million. We were missing Harmadon on there because that is in the 07. You put about $2 million of Harmadon that's been in there, you're right at the $20 million. The difference is, as Tom said, is contingencies, but you also have reserves that we have to put in place that Tom talked about earlier. When you put the reserves in place together with the contingencies, it gets you up to the 25.5. And we've been quoting that number for a long time.
The contingencies and reserves, if everything goes as planned, that money will not be spent. Do we have the opportunity then to pay that back early?
There's 10-year call protection on it, so we can't pay it back early.
So we're stuck for 10 years.
We can't call it for 10 years. But what we can do is use it for other projects. If there's something left over, we can use it for projects in parks, essentially.
What's the latest we could go before we issue these bonds? Keeping in mind that if we waited a little longer, we might have a better idea what our total costs are going to be, so that we bond for the exact amount we need.
Well, the issue that you always run into is we have to have the method of payment in place before we can let contracts. And we don't. We're right now in the planning process. Particularly the library is the main one that you're dealing with there. We're in the planning process with the architects. And we have to have, like I say, in place the bonds before we could let contracts. I don't think it would. We've considered, actually, from a financial standpoint, of delaying them another 90 days. We didn't see that was going to necessarily gain us anything in terms of interest rates. And the contingencies would have still all been approximately the same. So we went ahead with this one. You know, frankly, we hit one out of the park again. Our double A3 rating got us a rate of 431, which is 16 basis points below what we did for the Lewis and Clark bonds. Now, the difference between Lewis and Clark and the quality of life is 10 years versus, or 20 years versus 30 years. You have a 10-year difference. We're almost right on top of the Lewis and Clark bond when you take into account the timing difference, maturity difference between the two. Hard to beat, and really with no real downside risk to the city.
Well, I won't dispute the fact that we got a good interest rate, but my concern is that we could potentially be bonding for not only these three projects, but untold other projects and spending 20 years paying for them.
Councilor Costello?
Gene, I'm sorry, you just said it, but what's going to be the issue amount?
25.557. 25,570,000.
Contra Cavanaugh?
Our original discussions were $25 million, and that included a $12 million swimming pool.
No, it did not. That's why we had the 35 million in there.
It was 35?
It was 35 million. That's what it's approved for.
That's what we approved.
Okay.
And we took that 12 million out.
All right.
Councilor, excuse me?
So you've got a pool in there at 4.7 million is what you have today.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes, I agree with Councilor Cavanaugh that, we're going to be spending some more money on these additional park projects, and I guess we don't know any of the park projects that are top priority items at this time that we might want to spend it on or not.
We haven't committed to spending anything at this point. So until we know where the thing shakes out at, yeah, you know, we can't really answer that question. Certainly, it would come back before the council. I don't know whether it'd take a resolution or anything. I don't think so to spend that money, but certainly the council would be sought on what, if anything, if that money was spent on. I don't know if we could just sit on it. We may be able to do that also and essentially create a sinking fund.
Sometimes when people ask me how much debt the city has, I say around $260 million. With this bond issue, what's a good number to tell the people when they ask how much the city's in debt, including this bond issue?
265.
Okay, what you should, we give this to you every month, and it's page 16. It gives you every month a report on the debt that is authorized, outstanding, the whole 9 yards. So it's all right there for you.
And so what's the number I should tell people?
You have authorized, not issued, 51 million. You have amount outstanding, 214 million. And those two together come to 265 million, which is authorized and not outstanding.
And once again, is that including these so-called quality of life bonds?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
At 35 million.
Okay, so then we shouldn't say 265.
That number will drop. That number will, well, at the end of October, that's where it was at. That number will now drop in the November report. You'll see that number drop by about $12 million because we did not issue it.
Okay, so now we're in December, not in October. So the number should be 253?
253 for the outstanding and authorized.
And, okay, that's the number. Okay.
I'd recommend you look at this every month, page 16. It's got all the information you want on it, and it's the correct information.
Well, I was asking for, here's December, this is December 3rd, so that was what I was more interested in rather than October.
Councilor Litz?
I've got a question maybe for Tom there on the contingency that's available. Would that contingency be available for all three of the projects that were under the headline of this project, or this bonding?
I don't recall the exact wording of it. It would certainly be parks and possibly the library, but that's it, nothing else.
Because my understanding and my thoughts were in the beginning, the pool is going to cost $4.7 million or whatever it is, but you still got a hole where the old one is. You've still got other issues at that park, and I was hoping we'd have some extra money there to finish the park. We can't just put the pool in and call it good, because it never was that way.
Yeah. You've got some amendments pending on the library, too, that lead into that, so.
Very good, thank you.
Councilor Costello?
Gene, on the quality of life bond, so much of it is prescribed by just the financial community as far as the interest and everything else. The really only variable for the city is how much we put in a contingency. Is that correct?
Yeah.
We have to have that year's deposit.
It has to be the contingency has to be a reasonable number. We don't want to, we'd run into some IRS trouble on that if you start overshooting numbers like that.
What is a contingency in this one?
I don't know what the number is right off the top of my head.
Just rough, any idea?
A couple $1 million, if that. Yeah. And the library's already eating into that contingency, so.
Councilors, would you have any other questions on the monthly financial report? Thank you both very much for your work with us throughout the year on finances. And now, Director Roanhorst, would you please, I know that we all know that you are chairing the performance measurement program for our city, and we look forward to working closely with you. And will you please go ahead and introduce our guest and whatever else you have on this topic?
Thank you. If you all recall, the mayor in his budget address back in July talked about the institution of performance management as a new venture for us to figure out in a more appropriate manner how to best spend the taxpayers' money. We kicked that program off today with a training session. There was about an hour and a half training session from 8:30 to 10. There was 3 council members there. We certainly appreciate you being there. I and Kristen Caffey spent the remainder of the day together with our guest going through individual departments. We have all day tomorrow going through individual departments also. We would be more than happy to entertain any of the council members that would like to attend. I can tell you, frankly, my brain right now is in DASD full. Computer does not compute, overload. It's but it looks very, very good. And we have with us today the person that's doing the training for the staff in the city, and he will share with us some history of the ICMA and their performance management program, and then some other things that he's noted today. His name is Don Glow. Don?
Members of the council, thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you today and talk a little bit about the ICMA Center for Performance Measurement. My name is Don Glow. I'm one of the senior management associates in the center. Those of you who are not familiar with ICMA, it's the International City County Management Association. It's an association of 9,000 professional city and county managers worldwide. One of the units within ICMA is the Center for Performance Measurement. And the mission of the CPM is to help local governments improve the effectiveness and efficiency of public services through the collection, analysis, and application of performance information. Now, the City of Sioux Falls has kicked off its membership in the CPM as of this morning with a general session, and we'll be continuing. We continue through the day with some specific department sessions, and we'll continue tomorrow. What I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of what the center does on a day-to-day basis, and then talk to you a little bit about what we see as the keys for success of participation in the CPM. And not to bury the lead, but I'm already seeing some of those keys just in the time that I've been here today, so I'll talk a little bit about that. What the center does is we have a participation group of 200 communities across the country, cities and counties of all sizes, from the city of Los Angeles down to some communities that are under 5,000. Those communities each year submit to us performance information in 15 different service areas. We then take that performance information and we go through a 3-step cleaning process. And the idea, the objective is of that cleaning process is to be able to provide back to the participants clean, apples-to-apples data that they can then use to make management decisions. The cleaning process includes folks like myself looking at the data, just scanning it and seeing if anything jumps out as being odd compared to last year, odd compared to other communities in the program, just making sure that the data makes sense. The next step in the process is to look for outliers. So for every numerical performance measurement that we collect, we calculate the average and 2 standard deviations. In any data element that's submitted by a participating community that falls outside those 2 standard deviations, a red flag goes up, and we'll get back to them for more information. We also go through a logic check program, where we make sure that the data that's submitted by the communities in the program, make sure that the data is consistent with each other within a service area template, so that we make sure that there's no inconsistencies between question 22 and question 56, no logical inconsistencies. Once we've gone through that 3-step cleaning process, we can confidently report back to the communities and present to them all of the data that was submitted, and they can rely on the data knowing that it's been clean. All the communities have participated in the program and answered the questions the same way, and they can rely on the data to make management or operational decisions. Now, the process that we're going through today and tomorrow is to make sure that the city staff understand how to submit the data to us. And really, that's just the first step in the process. What needs to happen beyond that is the city staff and the city council and the mayor need to begin to use the data once you receive it back from us in a clean fashion. That's really the key that we see in a successful performance measurement implementation. And I said it twice this morning. If you're collecting the data just to collect the data, it's a waste of your time, and we certainly don't want you to do that. We want you to look at the data and use the data to make decisions. And the key to that we see is when the city council gets engaged. And I'm very happy to report that the level of engagement that I have seen so far in the city of Sioux Falls is as good as any that I've seen anywhere. So that's an exciting development, and I think you all should be very proud of that. But I would encourage you to keep that level of engagement up. And one of the ways you can do that is to demand of the city staff that they start using the performance measures when they come to talk to you about their programs, when they come to talk to you about their budgets. Ask them, you're asking for $1 million. What are we going to get for our $1 million? What is the community going to get? How does this compare to, or how does this fit in with the city council's strategic plan? Does it fit in with our quality of life issues? Does it make our city more safe? Does it help us improve our infrastructure? Once you start pulling on the data from the city staff, then it will hit home with them that this is something that's important, they need to consider, and they need to keep their heads about it. Now, I have no question, just having been here one day, I have no question that your city staff are already engaged in the process, and they already understand the importance of it. The level of complexity of the questions that I got from city staff during the course of the day today, the level of engagement and the level of preparedness is as good as any city that I've seen so far. So again, you should be proud of that. I hope you will keep that up. I hope you will continue to pull from the city staff, pull the information. I hope you will continue to use the performance information that they generate to help you make your long-term strategic and managerial decisions. That's how a performance measurement program becomes successful. And at CPM, we will continue to be engaged with you to assist you if there's an analysis that you need to do of the data, if you need some other information from other communities. We'll be more than happy to provide that to you and support you in any way to make you successful. That's a very quick and brief overview of the Center for Performance Measurement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Would any of you have any questions or comments? A couple of you who were there with me this morning. Councilor Jameson?
Don, this morning you gave an example of, I think, pothole patching. Mm-hmm. And the question that you said was the key is what should it cost to patch
right.
a pothole. I think you might share that
sure.
example with the council and the public because this is being televised. So.
Yeah. It's an example that we use quite often, and it's from a community in Metro Atlanta. And it was a situation where the coordinator of Public Works was standing before the city council and talking about the pothole repair program. And the coordinator of Public Works was able to indicate how many potholes had been repaired, how many dollars per pothole, how many potholes of various sizes, the streets that the potholes were on, and so forth. And in conclusion, he said that it cost, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was something like $12.30 to fill a pothole, $12.30. One of the council members looked at the Public Works coordinator and said, well, how much should it cost? Is $12.30 good? Is it bad? Is it ugly? And unfortunately, the Public Works coordinator, because he had no context, he had no way of answering that question. Now, because in the Center for Performance Measurement, we provide standardized apples-to-apples data, that allows you to know whether what you're doing is good, bad, or ugly, because you can compare yourselves to other communities, knowing that the data has been cleaned. It allows you to have that standardized comparisons that's really valuable when you want to know whether the job you're doing is good compared to other communities. Thank you.
Mr. Glow, is it Glow?
Glue.
Glue, excuse me for mispronouncing your name. First of all, welcome to our community.
Thank
We are
you.
glad to have you with us today. Councilor Jameson's question reminded me of a question or a part of your presentation that I thought was a good reminder to us. Would you just share what you did with us as far as, the difference between output and outcome?
Sure.
I thought that was a good reminder.
And thank you for bringing that up. That's an important distinction to make, and it's one that a lot of folks have a little bit of trouble wrapping their head around. And I talked this morning about the different categories of performance measures, ranging from descriptors, which essentially just describe your community, all the way up to outcomes, which really tie most closely to your strategic objectives in your plan. But one of the mid-range measures is outputs. And, for example, an output would be how many lane miles you plowed, how many acres you mowed, how many code enforcement inspections you conducted. The issue that I have with performance measure or with output measures is that they tell you what you're doing, but they don't tell you how well you're doing it. So there's sort of a disconnect between the strategic plan and your workload, or a disconnect between your workload and what is expected of you in the community. To be honest with you, the community doesn't really care how many lane miles you plowed. They want to know, can they get out of their driveway at 7 o'clock in the morning? Mm-hmm. They don't care how many acres of turf you mowed. They want to know, is the park a place where I'm proud to bring my out-of-town friends? That's what's important to the community. That's what's important to you as elected officials. And those are the outcomes that we try to drive our participating communities toward. The outcomes are the ones that are most important. The outputs are simply a step toward that process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glue, and we do look forward to working closely with you throughout this whole process. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you again. And
thank you very much.
And at this point, I'm going to adjourn our informational. I know the Fiscal Committee is going to meet in a few minutes yet today, and did I forget anything from any of you? Okay, the informational is adjourned, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock tonight right here in this room. Thanks.